Chapter 3, Ecology. We've seen how wetlands and watercourses provide many hydrologic functions and values. They retain floodwaters, recharge groundwater, and help to clean our water.
But it isn't all about water.
You're right. Wetlands and watercourses provide many ecological functions and values too. These resources are highly productive and complex ecosystems, which are an important part of the web of nature.
Back to those in the know.
The web of nature is something that we all have to keep in mind as conservation biologists. We used to learn about the food chain, and we found that it's really much more complicated than that. It's not just one thing eats another and another up the chain. It's all sorts of interconnectivity between various living things and abiotic resources. Water and sunlight really form the basis of this whole food web.
The amount of primary production that occurs in wetlands is second or third only to coral reefs and tropical rainforests. So very, very important systems.
Plants take water and air and the energy of the sun and convert it into energy and carbohydrates that they need to grow.
In these wetlands, such as behind us, we have plants. Animals eat those plants.
Then other things eat that, from insects up to large herbivores. Fish may be eating the insects, an osprey will eat the fish. The osprey may get eaten by a bald eagle or may die and be eaten by a turkey vulture.
A lot of folks will say, well, why worry about, the small frogs and, these insects or smaller invertebrates that are occurring in the landscape. Really, the larger question is protecting healthy ecosystems. You'll have a lot of the leaves that will fall down into the wetland, and they're broken up. In fact, they form the basis of these isolated wetlands ecosystems. So they're broken down by fungi, by a variety of invertebrates that occur in these wetlands, which in turn are fed on by the salamander larvae and other insects that are in there. And many of those animals then move back into the forest. In fact, one study in a New Hampshire forest found that the biomass of just the redback salamander was larger than that of small mammals in the forest and equal to that of all the birds. That's one species of salamander. We have 14 different species, so imagine the biomass around some of our wetlands.
Biodiversity is extremely important on this planet. Everything is evolved to coexist and to interact with everything else.
What we rely on to provide biodiversity and healthy ecosystems is a diverse portfolio of wetlands. So small ones have an important function because they can be so small where they hold water for a short period of time that species like fairy shrimp can survive in those, but not other ones because they have fish and other predators that preclude their presence.
The web is extremely complicated, and you can never predict what impacts things might have. Cutting a strand here, you never know what strand is going to be the last straw that have an effect on something that people might care about.
You see the connections and interrelations? Wetlands and watercourses are dynamic and diverse communities and are an interrelated web of nature.
Having a diversity of wetlands and watercourses is important for a multitude of invertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, fish, birds, and mammals.
Yes. Diversity in size and type of wetlands is not only important to the hydrologic cycle, but also provides numerous ecological functions and values.
Let's hear about different wetlands and watercourses.
There is a wide variety of wetland types in the state, and each one is somewhat unique.
What you're seeing here is more of a marsh. We have forested wetlands, red maple swamps, fens, bogs, all sorts of different wetlands. And then, of course, deeper water, open water habitats, reservoirs, lakes, things of that nature. All wetlands are important, regardless of their size. The smallest vernal pools, for instance, those are extremely critical to amphibians and to some of the birds that rely upon some of those amphibians.
These vernal pools, these small kettles, even though this is very small, it has a high richness to it. In fact, there are some state-listed species of salamanders that occur in this pool. But if you notice a few things, you'll notice that there is some sunlight penetrating through here. And where you have open canopy, the forest cover, that allows light in, which will change the vegetation of the pool. You can see some grasses in here. So if you had a pool, for example, that was completely closed canopy, you would not see those grasses develop. And you may say, well, what effect would that have? That can have an effect on the species of frogs, for example, that utilize this.
So what we have behind us is a really good example of a cattail marsh. These are becoming increasingly rare here in Connecticut, and part of that is just due to water levels and nutrient cycling. Another reason in many people's minds is that we've lost muskrats. And muskrats are kind of an integral part of a cattail marsh, and we just don't have muskrats anymore.
The greatest value that I can place on wetlands is the variation in habitat and the species diversity that's found in that habitat.
In a larger wetland, you probably have different hydrologic regimes. You might have a stream, some open water, some ponding conditions, and the more variety you have, the more variety of wildlife and vegetation you can support.
There are different ways that rivers and streams and wetlands provide habitat. They may provide food, they may provide shelter, breeding areas, overwintering areas, but also migration corridors.
You know, people may not consider themselves a birder, and they just may enjoy seeing the birds come to their feeder in the colder months. And they may not realize that a lot of those birds spend some part of their time in wetlands or along watercourses, and how important those areas are for migratory stopover, for wintering areas, and in some cases for nesting areas for the species that we love to see in our backyards.
These inland freshwater shallow marshes are also very important for the wading birds, the herons and the egrets that use them for foraging. The deeper water areas are better for our diving ducks.
Where we're standing gives a pretty good illustration on the wetland transition from an upland to an open water body. From a short distance, you go from upland hayfield, which is being mown with the hay taking out, is one of the agricultural practices that's being used on this piece of land, to open water out where your pond is. And you go from a zone that is flooded for a short period of time. Wetland plants that would occur here would be the marsh fern. You do get some patches of sphagnum moss, and this particular species of sphagnum moss would not grow in a bog, but would only grow in this area where you have an alternating water table, and that's exposed for much of the year. From this zone, you get into a little wetter zone, which is flooded for a longer period of time, and it has burreed. This has some value for waterfowl and other birds that eat the seeds. From here, you get into a plant with the pink flowers, is smartweed or water pepper. That does have a lot of wildlife value, particularly for waterfowl, because they eat the seeds. And then the shrub zone along the edge, which is mostly buttonbush, a little bit of high bush blueberry. But these shrub zones provide nesting habitat for a lot of songbirds. Beyond that, you get your zone of floating emergence, the whitewater lily, and there's some yellow flowers in there, which would be the bullhead lily.
The riparian forest, or the streamside forests, are important for producing the nutrients that the stream relies on. It provides shade that maintains proper temperatures of the water. It also provides woody debris that, when it falls into the stream, helps shape and maintain the habitat structure of those stream systems as well. Things like wood turtles like to tuck in underneath this kind of cover for the winter, and fish like to sit where they're more protected from things like ospreys and eagles that would otherwise prey on them.
Beavers will move into an area and a slow-moving stream, they'll dam it up and create a beaver pond. And in that beaver pond, you'll find fish, frogs, salamanders, waterfowl, wading birds, a variety of insects, butterflies, dragonflies, damselflies.
Sometimes it's hard for people to understand why beavers are allowed to dam up a water body, but they are not. You know, why don't beavers have to get permits? I have to get a permit for this stuff. What's important to recognize is that these ecosystems have been here for thousands of years. And for most of that time, beavers have been here too.
Beaver used to be the wetlands engineers. They would take an area of stream and they turn it into a marsh and then into a shallow pond. They would kill the trees. The trees would create habitat for nesting tree swallows. The trees would fall down, the beaver would move away, it would turn into a marsh. Now, by trying to preserve that as one individual wetland type, it's really eliminating the ability of that diversity and that progression over habitat types to occur over a period of time.
Many of Connecticut's wetland-dependent species are declining, and the reason for this loss is because of the loss or the degradation of wetland habitat.
It's estimated that over 43% of all the endangered species in North America are associated with wetlands. That just goes to show how important wetlands are.
You cannot have a species without its habitat. And once you've destroyed a wetland or degraded a wetland for development, that habitat is lost forever.
It's that healthy ecosystem with all of its pieces, the salamanders, the invertebrates, the insects, the bugs that live in the soil, the microorganisms that maintain the chemical characteristics of the soil. All of these are critically important for maintaining the ecosystem services that we value.
So you see, each type of wetland and watercourse provides important ecological functions and values.
They are essential habitats for breeding, food, and cover for fish and wildlife, including many of our endangered species.
A diverse system of wetlands and watercourses is essential to the web of nature and a healthier planet.